Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another installment in our Character Spotlight series for Marvel Contest of Champions. Today, we have a very exciting character that was recently overhauled, and by recently I mean within the past year or so, and is actually a very fun character to play now that they have been overhauled and changed in terms of their basic functionality. You see him here on your screen, it's Hulkbuster, and there's a lot for us to dive into to fully comprehend how this character behaves. But as we do, make sure to check and see if you are subscribed to the channel. If you're not, go ahead and fix that real quick, as there's daily variety content coming your way. And if you find today's video helpful, enjoyable, and or interesting, make sure that you hit that like button. So we're going to start off with the base functions for this character, because there's a lot of details to go into for that. And we start off with two different features depending on whether or not you are using the character as an attacker or as a defender. If you use Hulkbuster as an attacker, he enters what's called Giant Buster mode, which allows him a minimal attack increase based off of how large his opponent is, as well as increased attack for each shock effect on the opponent. There's not a whole lot of ways that you can inflict shock upon your opponent, but there are a few and they are notable, so we will discuss those when we get to that point. However, if Hulkbuster is in a defensive state, he instead activates Iron Wall mode, which enhances his defensive abilities, allowing him to gain additional armor up buffs instead of the maximum cap that he normally has, as well as making his auto repair from his signature ability more efficient. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. As a passive effect, Hulkbuster has an indefinite armor up buff, and that can be consumed by using a couple of his attacks, but for the most part he's always going to have something active. And even if he loses that armor up buff, he does have a way to regain that, because every 15 seconds you will gain an additional armor up buff, which increases the armor rating by a pretty decent margin. If you are in the Giant Buster mode, you can have up to 2 of those armor up buffs active. If you are in the Iron Wall mode, then he can have up to 4 of those active, and that's pretty noteworthy as well. Anytime that Hulkbuster is conducting battle against non-cosmic opponents, he will gain a couple of additional benefits for each armor up buff that he has active on him. He will receive additional energy resistance, he will receive additional critical damage that he can deal out on his own attacks. The incoming bleed and poison debuffs from his opponents have a reduced potency. His enemies suffer minus 20% of their offensive ability accuracy, which is actually a pretty big deal when it comes to dealing with those peskier attributes of some of those opponents. And the opponents also suffer a reduction in their critical damage rating, which is also something that's pretty good to see. Now, whenever Hulkbuster is struck by an opponent and that strike is a critical hit, Hulkbuster has a 60% chance to consume one of his armor up buffs and inflict a shock debuff upon the opponent. It doesn't deal a whole lot of damage on its own, but it does last for 10 seconds, and as we mentioned before, when he is in the Giant Buster mode, he has a raised attack while that shock is active, and that is for each shock that is active on the opponent. So there is a little bit of a benefit that you get from having that trade-off of losing your armor up buff and placing that shock debuff on the opponent. Hulkbuster's heavy attack also has a 100% chance to inflict a shock debuff, and in this case the shock debuff is a little bit weaker, but it does not come at the detriment of one of your armor up buffs, and it still has that 10-second duration. So if you further want to increase your attack power, that is another option that you can go for. Now, any time that Hulkbuster launches a special attack, he has a 100% chance to inflict an armor break debuff on his opponent, and that will remove one armor up buff from the opponent, and it's a very considerable drop, scaling to what the armor breaks are normally capable of doing. And additionally, he has a 100% chance to gain an unblockable buff, which lasts for 1 second off of the start of the special attack. And that has additional benefits when it comes to the specials 1 and 2, which we'll talk about right now. Now for the special 1, this attack has a 100% chance to stun for 1.5 seconds. But if the attack breaks through an opponent's block, and that is the contingency with that, is you can't just strike into your opponent, they do have to be holding their block, and you do have to break through it with the attack. That stun duration will be increased by 1.25 seconds for each armor up buff that is on Hulkbuster. So if you are facing off against this opponent as a defender and they have 3 or 4 of those armor up buffs stacked up, then you're going to be in for a lot of trouble, because that's going to have a very lengthy stun that it's going to inflict upon you. But all things considered, there's better options in his kit, such as the Special 2. Now this attack has a 100% chance to power lock his opponents, which severs the flow of power for a 3-second duration, which isn't anything super crazy. However, if that initial strike breaks through an opponent's block, each of the strikes of the beam from his follow-up attack has a 100% chance to inflict power burn, which drains 1 bar of the opponent's power and inflicts direct damage proportional to that power that's been drained. And since there are 3 different pulses of that beam, you can reduce the opponent down to 0 power from wherever they're at with their power gauge, and then keep them locked for an additional 3 seconds, allowing you to get a full combo in without the opponent building back up their own power meter, which is a phenomenal buff that really helps with controlling the flow of a fight by restricting what your opponent is capable of doing during that time frame. And then for the Special 3, it's not as powerful as the Special 2, but it does have a unique perk. Now, it will drain up to 50% of the opponent's power, so you can still reduce them down from launching their own special attacks, and you don't have to worry about this attack pushing them beyond the brink of their power threshold, because it is going to back them down off whatever they had stored up. And this will inflict up to 3 shock debuffs on your opponent, each of which has an 80% chance to activate. So you have a fairly good chance of getting 3 of those shock debuffs active on your opponent, and these last for 20 seconds. So that's twice as long as other shock debuffs that can be dealt by Hulkbuster, and if you recall, he has an increase to his attack power for each of those shock debuffs that's active on the opponent. So that's a 20-second attack increase that you can gain passively by launching a Special 3. And additionally, Hulkbuster does enter into an unblockable state for 4.5 seconds after this attack has culminated. So that really helps him in terms of continuing to keep layering on damage once the attack has been used. So it's not as useless as other Special 3s that we've seen. It's actually probably one of the more useful ones. However, in most circumstances, you're going to want to focus on breaking through an opponent's block with your Special 2, because that is by far the best power control management that you can get out of a wide variety of the cast. Now that we've talked about everything that comes with Hulkbuster's standard kit, there are the additional benefits that are provided to him by having the character awaken. And this is the Veronica Mark II ability, which activates similar to the other Iron Man type abilities, where once you drop it down below 15% health once per fight, you'll have a 100% chance to gain a self-repair regeneration buff, which lasts for 12 seconds and recovers a fairly significant portion of his health. It rounds out to being about 50% when the ability is fully upgraded to its maximum potency. However, if Hulkbuster is stunned, this health regeneration is removed. And then, depending on if you're in the Giant Buster or the Iron Wall form, you will have an additional benefit. In the Giant Buster mode, you have increased attack rating while that self-repair is active, and in Iron Wall mode, you have an additional increase to the potency of that self-repair. So on the defensive side of things, he's going to regenerate more health than he would otherwise. So that's Hulkbuster, and I'm really happy with the changes that were made to this character, because beforehand, Hulkbuster was abysmal. He was not worth putting any time or resources into, but now he's a very formidable opponent, especially when it comes to power management in the middle of a fight. But what do you think about Hulkbuster? Do you enjoy playing with this character? Are there things that you would like to see changed? Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. And again, if you've made it this far, make sure that you leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.